He was not a god, not really. He was something stranger, a giant son who talked his way into the halls of the gods and became the most dangerous being in the Norse universe, not because of his strength, not because of his power, but because he was clever enough to destroy everything from the inside. He was Odin's blood brother, Thor's travelling companion. The gods laughed at his jokes, relied on his cunning, and invited him to their feasts. And then, one day, he killed the most beloved god in existence and set in motion the end of the world. This is the story of Loki, the trickster, the shapeshifter, the father of monsters, and the god who burned it all down. Loki was not an Aesir god. He was born to the giant Farbauti and the giantess Laufey. By blood he belonged to the enemies of Asgard. He was a Jotun, a being from the race that the gods had been fighting since the beginning of time. And yet somehow Loki ended up living among the gods as one of their own. The myths never fully explain how this happened. What we know is that at some point in the ancient past, Loki and Odin swore a blood oath to each other. They cut their palms, mixed their blood, and became brothers, not by birth, but by choice. This meant that Loki could not be turned away from any table where Odin sat. He had a permanent seat in Asgard, and no god could remove him without violating the most sacred bond in Norse culture. It is worth pausing here because this is one of the most misunderstood things about Loki. He was not Thor's brother. That is a Marvel invention. In the original myths, his bond was with Odin, the Allfather himself. And that made Loki untouchable. He used that position masterfully. Loki was impossibly charming, wickedly funny, and sharper than anyone in the room. He could talk his way out of anything. He could talk his way into anything. The gods kept him around because he was useful and entertaining, and because getting rid of him would mean Odin breaking his oath. But there was always something off about Loki, a coldness behind the smile, a cruelty in the jokes, the kind of person who makes everyone laugh but who nobody fully trusts. The gods sensed it. They just chose to ignore it. Loki was a shapeshifter. He could become anything, a salmon, a fly, a mare, an old woman, a young girl. No other being in Norse mythology could change form as freely or as completely as Loki. He shifted not just his appearance, but his entire nature, slipping between identities the way other gods swung swords. His tricks were legendary. Once he cut off all of Sif's hair, Sif being Thor's wife, whose golden hair was one of the treasures of Asgard. Thor was so furious he nearly killed Loki on the spot. But Loki, facing certain death, talked his way out of it by promising to get the dwarves to forge new hair for Sif made of actual gold. And he did. But he couldn't leave it there. While visiting the dwarves, Loki couldn't resist making a side bet. He wagered his own head that one group of dwarves couldn't outdo another in craftsmanship. The result of that bet produced some of the most powerful artifacts in Norse mythology: Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, Odin's spear, Gungnir, and Freyr's golden ship, Skidbladnir. Loki lost the bet, but when the dwarves came to collect his head, he argued that they had a right to his head but not his neck, and since they could not cut one without the other, they could not collect. They settled for sewing his mouth shut instead. This is Loki in miniature. He creates a problem, solves the problem in a way that creates a bigger problem, nearly dies, and then wriggles free through sheer cleverness, but never without consequence. Every trick left a scar. Every joke had a cost, and the costs were accumulating. Loki's children were the most terrifying beings in the Norse universe. With the giantess Angerboda, he fathered 3 creatures that would haunt the gods until the very end of the world. The first was Fenrir, a wolf of impossible size. When Fenrir was young, he was brought to Asgard, and the gods tried to raise him. But the wolf grew larger every day, and soon the gods realized that Fenrir would one day be powerful enough to destroy them. They bound him with a magical chain called Gleipnir, forged by dwarves from impossible things, the sound of a cat's footsteps, the breath of a fish, the roots of a mountain. Fenrir was tricked into allowing the chain to be placed on him, and when he realized he could not break free, he bit off the hand of the god Tyr, who had placed his hand in the wolf's mouth as a gesture of trust. Fenrir has been chained ever since, growing larger, growing angrier, waiting for the day the chain snaps. The second was Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent. This was a snake so enormous that Odin cast it into the ocean, where it grew until it encircled the entire world and bit its own tail. It lies beneath the seas coiled around Midgard, and the day it releases its tail is the day the world ends. Thor and Jormungandr hated each other with a fury that transcended reason. They were destined to face each other at the end of all things. The third was Hel. She was not a monster in the traditional sense. She was a woman, but only on one side. Half of her body was beautiful, alive and warm. The other half was rotting, dead and cold. Odin sent her to the underworld, Niflheim, where she became the ruler of the dead, not the glorious warrior dead who went to Valhalla, but everyone else, the sick, the old, the unlucky. Hel ruled a grey, cold kingdom of billions, and she ruled it with quiet, absolute authority. 3 children, a wolf that would swallow the sun, a serpent that encircled the world, a queen of the dead, and all 3 were Lokis. Baldr was the god of light, beauty, and joy. He was the most beloved figure in all of Asgard, kind, gentle, radiant. Everyone loved Baldr. The gods loved him. The mortals loved him. Even the natural world seemed to love him. He was, in every way, the opposite of Loki. When Baldr began having nightmares about his own death, his mother Frigg travelled across the entire world and extracted a promise from every living thing that it would never harm her son. Fire agreed, water agreed, iron agreed. Every plant, every stone, every disease, every animal, all of them swore an oath to never hurt Baldr, all except one. Frigg skipped the mistletoe because it seemed too small and too harmless to bother with. The gods, overjoyed that Baldr was now invincible, turned it into a game. They stood in a circle and hurled weapons at him, swords, axes, spears, rocks, and everything bounced off. They laughed. Baldr laughed. It was pure celebration. Loki watched. He discovered the mistletoe's exemption. No one knows exactly why he did what he did next. Jealousy, perhaps. Or something darker. A compulsion to destroy anything pure, simply because it existed. Loki carved a dart from mistletoe and approached Hoder, Baldr's blind brother, who stood at the edge of the circle, unable to join the game. Loki placed the dart in Hoder's hand, guided his aim, and told him to throw. The mistletoe struck Baldr in the chest, and Baldr, the most beloved god in existence, fell dead. The laughter stopped, the world went silent, and nothing in the Norse universe was ever the same again. The gods discovered what Loki had done, and this time there was no talking his way out, no clever argument, no loophole. He had crossed the one line that could never be uncrossed. Loki ran. He hid in a waterfall, transforming himself into a salmon to escape. But the gods found him. They dragged him to a cave deep beneath the earth. They brought his sons, Vali and Nafi. In one of the most horrifying moments in Norse mythology, the gods transformed Vali into a wolf, and the wolf tore his own brother Nafi apart. The gods then took Nafi's entrails and used them as chains to bind Loki to 3 sharp rocks. Above him they placed a venomous serpent whose fangs dripped burning poison directly onto Loki's face. His wife Sigyn, the one figure in all of mythology who showed Loki genuine, unconditional love, sat beside him holding a bowl to catch the venom. But every time the bowl filled and she turned away to empty it, the poison struck Loki's skin, and his screams were so violent that the earth itself shook. The Norse said that earthquakes were caused by Loki writhing in agony beneath the world, and there he remained, bound, burning, waiting. Because Loki's story does not end in that cave. The chains would not hold forever, and when they finally broke, Loki would rise, not as a trickster, not as a guest among gods, but as their destroyer. When Ragnarok finally arrives, Loki breaks free from his chains. Fenrir shatters his bonds. Jormungandr releases its tail and rises from the ocean. The 3 children of Loki, kept apart for ages, are finally unleashed upon the world at the same moment. Loki sails to Asgard on Naglfar, a ship built entirely from the fingernails of the dead. Behind him march the armies of Hel's domain and the fire giants of Muspelheim. The Bifrost, the Rainbow Bridge, shatters under the weight of the advancing forces. The sky splits open, the stars fall from the heavens. In the final battle, Fenrir swallows Odin whole, the All-Father, the god who had spent his entire existence preparing for this moment, devoured by Loki's son. Thor kills Jormungandr but is poisoned by the serpent's venom and dies after taking 9 steps. The god Heimdall and Loki face each other on the battlefield, and they kill each other simultaneously. The fire giant Surtur then unleashes a wave of flame that engulfs the entire world. The 9 realms burn. Yggdrasil trembles. The gods die. The world sinks into the sea. And then, slowly, quietly, the world rises again. The earth emerges from the water, green and new. 2 human survivors crawl out from the trunk of Yggdrasil. A new son is born from the old one, and the cycle begins again. But Loki is gone. His story finally is over. Loki is unlike any other figure in world mythology. He is not a straightforward villain. He is not a hero. He is something that resists easy categories, a being who helped the gods and destroyed them, who created and obliterated, who was loved and hated in the same breath. He is the friend who betrays you, the insider who tears the house down, the part of you that wants to watch everything burn just to see what happens next. Every culture recognizes this figure because every culture has known someone like him. Charming, brilliant, and ultimately destructive, not because they lack the ability to do good, but because something in them cannot resist the pull of chaos. The Norse did not make Loki a giant or an outsider by accident. They understood that the greatest threat to any civilization does not come from outside the walls. It comes from someone already inside, someone who knows where all the cracks are, someone who was trusted. That is why 1,000 years later we still tell his story, and that is why it still unsettles us. If you want the full story of what Loki destroyed, watch our upcoming video on Ragnarok, the end of the gods told from beginning to end. And if you missed the story of Odin, the god who spent his whole life preparing for that very battle, go watch that now. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And if there's a myth you want us to cover, drop it in the comments. We'll see you in the next tale.